It's a pleasure to be here, and it's an honor that I have been asked to introduce Mary McGrath as your president. Traditionally, what we do is we talk about and we show baby pictures and child pictures, etc. But I'm not going to do that because we know we're introducing Mary McGrath. You don't have to guess who it is from her baby picture, but so I'm going to talk about the day I was born, which is a little bit different, and while I'm here I can do that. October 30, 1939, Life magazine came out that day with the greatest dancing couple in America. They were Velos and Yolanda. Now, what does this have to do with Mary McGrath? Mary McGrath is the Yolanda of plastic surgery. She can do anything a man can do, only she does it backwards and in heels. Mary was born in New York, the oldest of 4 children. Her father was a career officer in the Navy, so she had an education at an early age around the world. 3 high schools, graduating finally at Kyushu in Japan. She then went on to the College of New Rochelle. Now, the College of New Rochelle is an all-girls Catholic school. And it's a good thing that it was not co-ed, because in those days, if it were co-ed, Mary would be running away from all these guys and never have time to make the dean's list and go to medical school. But she was a philosophy major, and we're going to hear about ethics today. And her ethics possibly began with her philosophy major at New Rochelle. But during this time, she wanted to go to medical school, so she came back to home, where her father was stationed at the Philadelphia Naval Yard, needed prerequisites because she was a philosophy major, and she wound up getting her science prerequisites at Temple. I mean, if anyone's ever taken the Broad Street subway from the terminus at the Philadelphia Naval Yard to Temple, and Mike Benz has done this, you'll know that you've left the protection of the College of New Rochelle, and you're now in the sharing seats with the cross-section of America. She then went on to medical school at St. Louis University and finished there, obviously, and general surgery intern and resident at the University of Colorado. As an intern, and this is a theme you're going to see, she was the only woman in the intern class. And at Colorado, she was exposed to 2 giants in American surgery. Dr. Thomas Starzl and Dr. Ben Eisman, who was the chair of the Department of Surgery at that time, had great influences on Mary's surgical career. The Department of Surgery, as when Mary was a resident, notice, right in the middle of all these guys. Then she went on to Yale University, where she became a plastic surgery resident under her next mentor and role model, Dr. Thomas Krizik. I'm told that Mary slept through her residency. Even when reviewing charts, she had a hard time keeping her eyes open, and especially in conferences, she just didn't do it. But she woke up in time to finish her program and to be invited by Dr. Krizik to stay on the faculty at Yale. So her first career academic position was at Yale. This was followed by Columbia, by George Washington, by the University of California in San Francisco, where she currently is Associate Dean in charge of resident and fellow affairs, and where last year in 2017 she won the Exceptional Teacher Award in Teaching. She's the first woman to be chief of plastic surgery out of a division of plastic surgery, to be a plastic surgery program director, to be a director of the American Board of Plastic Surgery, to be president of the National Plastic Surgery Organization, the former PSEF, which is now PSF, and to be an officer of the American College of Surgeons. She was vice chair of the Board of Regents. She built a great department of plastic surgery at George Washington, where she was there for a number of years, and during that time She was elected a director of the American Board of Plastic Surgery, and here she is in the center of 17 very good-looking men. Then she stayed there in 1995 when she finished. She was still the only woman, finishing with her colleagues Stephen Arian and Gil Gradinger. Mary still is an examiner for the board and is a very valued oral examiner. She was chair of the Plastic Surgery Research Council and received the Baronio Sheep here from Fuadna High. And at her meeting in Washington, she had Senator Lowell Weicker as a dinner speaker. She's been a visiting professor all over the world, not only in the United States and Canada, here with Carolyn Kerrigan, or in Brazil and with Ivo Pitangui, and Melbourne, Australia with Ian Taylor, in Hong Kong, in the Philippines, and has been all over the world with lots of her 400 presentations. But many people don't know she's really an outdoors woman. She skied in Colorado with her resident mates, and that's a normal thing. She bicycled through Israel in 1996. She went whitewater rafting in Idaho. Doesn't look too bad, but it gets worse. And the water gets worse, and she did a great job. And this is a group, many of whom are in the audience right now, who were with her on that whitewater rafting trip in Idaho. And while there, she got a new friend. This is the only living creature that could kick Mary in the butt and get away with it. She walked through the Sikh in Petra to the temples. Only person I've known, and I think it's accurate, that she was president of both the Northeastern Society and the California Society because of her locations. But I think the most important thing for plastic surgery is that Mary represented us so well at the American College of Surgeons. She was on the Committee of Ethics and chaired it from 2003 to 2006 for 3 years, editor-in-chief of Ethical Issues in Clinical Surgery, which is a 2-volume chair, on the Board of Regents, became vice chair of the Board of Regents, and then was elected first vice president. Many of us thought that she should have been president. I still hold that view. And then she received the Distinguished Service Award. Her mentor, Tom Krizik, is shown here with Mary in their regental robes at the college, and the plastic surgery regents, who were former regents, who were still there, who were still alive when Mary was our regent, are shown here with Dr. Krizik, Dr. Yurkewicz, and with Ian Taylor, who was the honorary fellow. The Distinguished Service Award is a big deal, and she received this from the American College of Surgeons in 2011 from Dr. Britt. But she is very most proud of her family. Daughter Maggie, graduating from UCSF's medical school, is here on Mary's right, and on Maggie's right is her brother Rick. And so we have a woman who is a surgeon, an educator, an innovator, a leader, a mother, and a friend. And it's my distinct honor to introduce to you Mary McGrath, your president. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barry. I don't know where he found some of those photos. I have some ideas, and when I find you out there, I'm going to strangle my friends. As you all know, modern medicine has been moving away from its traditional purpose of healing patients. It's increasingly a discipline with a central aim of fulfilling wishes rather than treating illness. And plastic surgery has been in the front of this transformation of interventions that improve body image and affirm the values of youthfulness and personal success. However, we're no longer the only physicians providing medical services for healthy people who want further enhancement. And as other specialties increasingly engage in this work, I think plastic surgery has an experience to share and a moral ethic that has traditionally been largely unrecognized and underappreciated. Aesthetic surgery is an embellishment, and the control of it rests in the character of the individual surgeon. Overall, we have a remarkable record of proper behavior, and what I want to do this evening is celebrate our unique professional ethic. Let me show you a clinical case. This is a 71-year-old woman who presented from mastopexy. In addition to some general health issues, she had a history of pulmonary embolism at age 23, 2 episodes of DVT over the years, and a diagnosis of a positive factor V Leiden protein for which she was on lifelong anticoagulation. Her Caprini score was 10. During our consultation, I discussed the risks of discontinuing the anticoagulant, as well as those of bleeding, and told her that she was not a good surgical candidate. She returned for a second consultation and said she accepted the risks because she felt she could not continue to deal with the discomfort of her breast position and shape. Now, this isn't what I wanted to hear, so I asked her to come back a third time, and she came with her sister for more discussion and stated at that time that she accepted the risk of fatal embolism in preference to her breast condition. Now, I'm going to ask you to think about whether you would proceed with the surgery. I'm not going to tell you what I did. In preference, I'm going to tell you that I presented this case to a class of UCSF medical students during a teaching session on clinical decision-making. I asked them what I should do, and to a person, with no exceptions, they voted to go ahead and do the surgery, citing an informed patient's right to autonomy to make their own medical decisions. Perhaps I wasn't really surprised by this, since we know that the concept of autonomy is the core ethical principle that's highly valued in modern America. And with the ascendancy of patient autonomy and a greater focus on patients' rights, the physician's opinion has become devalued. How and why has this come about? Well, our story starts in the 18th century. Immanuel Kant is probably the most important philosopher of the past 2,000 years, and yet he lived a remarkably boring life. He was born and spent his entire life in the provincial Prussian university town of Königsberg, which is now Kaliningrad in Russia. He was an academic who studied and then spent his entire professional life at the university in Königsberg, and he apparently was so regular in his habits that the townspeople set their clocks by his afternoon walk. In his early career, he published in the area of natural science and only later developed his mature philosophy. And he, like Voltaire and Hume, lived near the end of the Enlightenment, a European cultural movement that replaced the traditions that spanned the 18th century. Enlightenment figures sought to replace the traditions and the old superstitions of religion and monarchy with a new worldview that relied primarily on the powers of reason and the individual. The Enlightenment drew from and furthered the development of new rational scientific methods that would become the scientific revolution. This rationalism swept the Western world, led to the reformation of the social order, and inspired the Republican revolutions in France and in the United States. Regarded by some as the greatest philosopher since ancient times, Kant's influence on Western thought is said to be immeasurable. It changed existing views as effectively as had Copernicus when he challenged the belief that the Earth was the center of the universe. Kant placed the human at the center of inquiry into knowledge, and he saw moral autonomy as central to humanity. In an essay in 1784 entitled "What is Enlightenment?" he answers in the first sentence, "Enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-incurred immaturity." He argues that the immaturity is self-inflicted not from a lack of understanding, but from a lack of courage to use one's own reason, intellect, and wisdom without the guidance of another. Sapere aude is the Latin phrase meaning dare to know, and it's also loosely translated as dare to be wise. In his essay, Kant used the phrase and defined it as have the courage to use your own understanding. In doing this, Kant claimed the phrase sapere aude as the motto for the entire period of the Enlightenment, and it remains the basis of theories that independent thinking and reason should direct the public sphere of human affairs. Independence, equality, and self-rule all flow from this, and so does modern liberalism. The battle cry of the Enlightenment lives on today in popular culture, and you have to wonder whether Immanuel Kant would be surprised to find that he's a cult hero with a T-shirt with his image, or on this picture, an infant's onesie with his quote. He was a Lutheran Protestant who never married, never traveled more than a few miles outside Königsberg, led a cloistered lifestyle, and was very fussy and fastidious. And yet his motto is seen in tattoos on the Berkeley campus and on a sparkling rosé that's made from grapes that are grown in Napa. Kant's rock star image is further helped by his comments on some other subjects. He who is cruel to animals becomes hard also in his dwellings with men. We can judge the heart of a man by his treatment of animals. Our next champion of autonomy is John Stuart Mill, who was the most famous and influential British philosopher of the 19th century. He was one of the last systematic philosophers and also an important public figure, pressing a liberal platform and serving in Parliament. Nowadays, Mill's greatest influence arises from his contributions to utilitarianism and liberalism. Utilitarianism is an ethical theory that judges whether or not something is right or wrong by what its consequences are. And the utilitarian would argue that the best consequence or outcome is the promotion of the greatest good or happiness for the greatest number. If a lie would save a life, it would be the morally correct thing to do. If bombing Hiroshima ended the war sooner, it was the morally correct thing to do. This kind of thinking cast aside all the rules and the religious dogma and the morality that's called now virtue ethics, and it became the mindset of the times. And interestingly, it shows up in our Declaration of Independence and our inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Mill was a student of Bentham and a staunch utilitarian. Actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, wrong as they tend to promote the reverse of happiness. But Mill's personal experience led him beyond utilitarianism to add another layer: his convictions about liberalism. He was the eldest son of a Scottish philosopher and economist, James Mills, and he was educated by his father and his father's associate, Jeremy Bentham. They developed an extremely rigorous education for him, and he was deliberately shielded from association with children his own age. The explicit plan was to produce a great intellect that would be the champion of utilitarianism. John Stuart was very precocious. He'd learned Greek by age 3, Latin by age 5, was a logician by age 12, a trained economist at age 16, and he founded a number of intellectual societies and study groups and contributed to important publications. When he was 20 years old, he had a nervous breakdown. And according to his autobiography, he asked himself whether his life's objective, the creation of a just society, was sufficient, and he concluded that it was not. Mill later claimed that he began to come out of his despair and his sadness with the help of poetry, specifically Wordsworth, but he discovered that engagement with and compassion for others caused a pivotal shift in his thinking. Influenced by European Romanticism, Mill rejected the view of humans purely as utility maximizers as too shallow a concept. He realized that happiness differs from person to person, and people need the freedom to try different experiments to discover what way produces happiness for them. He argued that liberty is a positive and constructive force, as it gives individuals the ability to take control of their own lives to gain autonomy and self-realization. Mill held the view that freedom to pursue one's own good in your own way is necessary since individuals know their own interests best. In his defense of individual autonomy, he introduces passionate arguments against paternalism. He opposes paternalism on the grounds that individuals are in a privileged position to know their own good and that moral equality of persons demands respect for others' liberty. He contends that the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. He does accept those who are too young or who are incapable of rational thought, but for all others, he condemns paternalism, including when it's used in an effort to protect someone from their own recklessness or their own bad judgment. His own good, either physical or moral, is not sufficient. He cannot rightfully be compelled to do or forbear because it will be better for him to do so, because it will make him happier, or even because of the opinion of others would be wise or even right. The only part of the conduct of anyone for which he is amenable to society is that which concerns other. In the part which merely concerns himself, his independence is a right absolute. Over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign. This view of autonomy and Mill's other ideas remain the basis of much liberal political thought. On Liberty has remained in print continuously since its initial publication, and to this day, a copy is presented to the President of the British Liberal Party as a symbol of office. Before leaving John Stuart Mill, I must mention that he was the first member of Parliament to call for women's suffrage. In this cartoon from Punch, his logic or franchise for females is being mocked. It says, "Pray clear the way for these persons." His thinking about women's rights was influenced by Harriet Taylor, a thinker and author he met at a dinner party when he was 24 years of age. She was married, but they fell deeply in love, and with the cooperation of her husband, came to an arrangement that was to persist for the next 19 years. John Stuart and Harriet were close collaborators in all their work, and she clearly influenced many of his central ideas. When her husband died, they finally married, and they wrote the landmark Subjection of Women. However, Harriet died several years later while she and Mill were traveling through France, and she was buried at Avignon. Mill subsequently purchased a home close to her grave, and he lived in Avignon for the rest of his life. Philosophical notions of liberty, individualism, and self-sufficiency were foundational parts of American ideology. Benjamin Rush, an Edinburgh-trained physician, was Surgeon General of the Continental Army, signed the Declaration of Independence, and practiced at the University of Pennsylvania. As an Enlightenment intellectual and physician, he had a major impact on the emerging medical profession in America. Rush held that freedom and independence were part of good health, believed that increased patient understanding would lead to better medical outcomes, but he never spoke of the concept of engaging patients in a decision-making process. In fact, he specifically called out the importance of the physician maintaining what he called inflexible authority over patients in matters essential to life. And indeed, the belief that the physician and the physician alone was qualified to diagnose and offer treatment was legitimatized by the birth of the scientific era in the early 19th century. The reliance on science effectively changed the nature of the medical profession. As technological advances led to greater complexity, it became clearer that the practice of medicine was way beyond the skill of a layman. And the AMA, established in 1847, emphasized that the superior knowledge of the physician carried with it the responsibility to benefit the sick, beneficence, and avoid causing harm, non-maleficence. By the end of the 1800s, there were 130 medical schools, state licensing requirements, and these all further validated the American physician's claim of professionalism. And American patients, even with their liberal, individualistic ideals, were willing to submit to the authority of their trusted physicians. For the first half of the 20th century, there was little change in the public's relationship with doctors. Historically, it's interesting to note that once the AMA and others established some uniformity for medical practice, the idea of consent began to arise as a legal issue. And a few lawsuits against physicians were decided in the US in the early 1800s. But these were rare, and they then stood for 40 years as the foundation of the law's treatment of patient consent. Prior to these cases, the courts had a very broad interpretation of consent, and these cases narrowed that legal description. The first three on this slide were very similar. Each was a surgical procedure where a decision was made intraoperatively to depart from the operation plan for the patient. Courts in Minnesota, Illinois, and Oklahoma found the surgeons liable for battery, but stipulated it's because the changes were made in the absence of life-threatening or urgent circumstances. If those conditions had been present, implied consent could have still been assumed. The fourth case, Schloendorf versus New York Hospital, is very different. In this case, Justice Cardozo planted the seed for what would become the doctrine of informed consent. He wrote, "Every human being of adult years and sound mind has the right to determine what should be done with his own body." This case was very high profile. It involved a patient with fibroids who'd consented to an examination under ether but specified that she didn't want an operation. The surgeon found a tumor. He performed a hysterectomy. The patient brought a lawsuit against the hospital, and she lost the case. But this is widely regarded in the legal world as the landmark, as the first time that language from the legal system goes beyond the duty to just obtain consent and presents patient self-determination as a principle. Cardozo, interestingly, went on to a seat on the United States Supreme Court as a liberal justice, and there continued to be occasional battery cases around the country, but the next major court case after this one about consent would not come until 1957. On December 9th, 1946, the doctor's trial began in Nuremberg, Germany. For 140 days, testimony was given about the scientific experiments that physicians had done on Jews, Poles, and Russians who were concentration and death camp prisoners. Monstrous practices came to light, and the atrocities, coupled with information about the camps themselves, prompted the judges to outline basic rules about human experimentation that must be observed to meet ethical and moral concepts. The Nuremberg Code admonishes that voluntary consent is absolutely essential, and human subjects must have sufficient knowledge and comprehension to make understanding and enlightened decisions. Over the following years, the medical community broadened the 10 principles first stated in this code with the Declaration of Helsinki. In the Declaration, in 1964, the term clinical research replaced human experimentation, and more comprehensive standards were adopted. Now, as all this was going on, most Americans remained very confident that such depravities did not occur in the United States. During World War II and the decades immediately following, very little attention was paid to whether subject consent was part of American research protocols. In 1966, this changed. Henry Knowles Beecher, professor and chair of anesthesia at Massachusetts General Hospital, published a searing expose in the New England Journal of Medicine. He outlined 22 examples of post-war research experiments, some involving children and other vulnerable groups, none of which involved subject consent. All were done at the most prestigious medical facilities in the country. Beaker had alerted the press of his pending publication, and while many scientists regarded this as wildly overstated, his charges of ethical malfeasance made national news. The front page headline in the Boston Globe asked, "Are human beings being used as guinea pigs and not told?" Coming as it did from a highly respected institution and citing so many examples of unethical research, Beecher's article resulted in a public outcry. And this was soon amplified by other events in which doctors and scientists were seen as abusing or potentially abusing the trust that historically had been placed in them by society. In 1967, baby Doe was born at Johns Hopkins with Down syndrome and duodenal atresia, and she died without surgery at the wish of her parents. Certain physicians were sufficiently troubled by these events that they made a short film which prompted public demand for a say in beginning-of-life decisions. In 1968, in response to the new field of transplantation, the Harvard Brain Death Committee developed medical criteria for brain death. They assumed the criteria would have broad social consensus, but the public quickly pointed out that the definitions of death were not solely the province of medicine. And in 1972, there was widespread media coverage of the Tuskegee syphilis study. Over 4 decades, the U.S. government doctors had studied the progression of syphilis in poor African-American men. The patients were not told their diagnosis, and they were not offered treatment even after penicillin became available. In 1979, Congress passed a law requiring federal rules to protect people participating in research trials, and the rules rely on the ethical principles laid out in the Belmont Report, which was written by an advisory committee created by Congress. Each of these events brought into public light what historically had been the province of the medical profession. Now there were new voices, those of the lawyers, the philosophers, the theologians, journalists, and the birth of what's called the bioethics movement. Now, while it obviously had some antecedents, medical bioethics as we know it today is a recent development. Starting with a series of conferences in the 1960s, it formally emerged with the establishment of permanent academic homes for the discipline. And it was to be a new genre of action-based ethics, a medical ethic fully engaged in bedside decisions. And its core commitment was to protect the freedom and rights of the patient, namely the preservation of autonomy. Why did autonomy rise to become the governing principle of contemporary medical ethics? Well, it was the convergence of many forces at that moment in time, aware of those experimental atrocities exposed at Nuremberg and the fearful disregard for human life in the concentration camps. There was a heightened sense of the sanctity of the patient. Having held up American moral precepts before the world, there was a determination not to fall into the danger of another Tuskegee. In addition, clinical medicine was advancing at a rapid pace, and with the technical advances came morally difficult and troubling questions. Neonatal intensive care units appeared for the first time, and with them came the need for decisions about very severely disabled newborns. The ability to extend life in medical ICUs with artificial life support challenged patients, families, and doctors. With organ transplantation, prenatal testing, genetic manipulation, and other life and death technologies came a real fear of letting doctors make the choice. There was widely felt anxiety that the scientists would fail to see the impact of their discoveries, and the scientists would be oblivious to the moral and the humane values. Think of Robin Cook's novel, Coma, which the New York Times Book Review called the #1 thriller in the year 1977. And importantly, the bioethics movement went on within the broader social context of the times. The 1960s and 70s were a period of activism championing individuality and freedom of choice, especially among racial minorities, women, and gays. Traditional authorities and social organizations, the military, government, and universities came under attack. With civil rights, feminism, abortion rights, sexual freedom, and individual lifestyle choices came a preoccupation with personal privilege that cuts across all domains of our society. And emerging from the social ferment of the 60s and 70s, patient rights and autonomy were affirmed as the central ethical principle of medical practice, and bioethics became entrenched as a crucial part of medical practice. Incidentally, starting simultaneously and continuing over the next 3 decades, there was also an explosion of malpractice suits and their associated awards. Many of these cases had to do with the mismanagement of informed consent. The ethical foundation of informed consent is autonomy-based law. It's argued that liability occurs when the decision-making ability of an autonomous individual is violated. When experts and lawyers speak of the autonomy model, frequent reference is made to the voices of the Enlightenment, our liberal American tradition, Millsian advocates of individual freedom, and the lessons learned from unethical research. It's been pointed out that positions in the American biomedical ethics movement are deeply interwoven with parallel legal opinion and procedure. As the discipline of medical ethics matured, autonomy remained its moral center. Eric Casale, in The Healer's Art, said, quotes, "To cure is the secondary aim of medicine. Its primary role is to restore patient autonomy," close quotes. Gillian, in the upper right-hand corner, calls respect for autonomy the first among equals. Buchanan and Brock wrote that competent individuals are better judges of their own good than are others. Vreech, one of the most prominent ethicists arguing for strong autonomy, wrote, quote, "The time has come to slaughter the slogan, 'Doctor knows best.' Physicians cannot be expected to predict what will benefit patients and protect them from harm. At best, they can only guess," close quotes. Students and learners in medicine are taught the 4 principles of medical ethics, always with autonomy at the head of the list, the overriding all the others. And paternalism, the presumed antonym, has become a pejorative term. So inculcated is the acceptance of autonomy as the central value of Western medicine that some bioethicists place no limit on patients' autonomy, excepting only when an action might be harmful to other people. They posit that patients should be allowed to make their own choices about their treatment, even if it is clear to all parties that others are in a better position to decide what will promote their well-being. And so valuable is that freedom that it follows that rational people must be allowed to make poor choices, because by doing so, they're using their capacities, controlling what's done to them, expressing themselves, and giving meaning and purpose to their lives. The persons themselves know better than others what is good or bad for their own happiness. Now, there's one notable exception in the United States, and that's in the public health area, where thinking is politicized, because here the tension, when the tension between personal rights and personal best interests play out. Think about fluoride in drinking water, seatbelt laws, mandatory bicycle helmets. Those are paternalistic measures that are taken to protect the well-being of people, whether they like it or not. Other issues, such as required vaccinations, remain subjects of heated public debate. The word written on the syringe there is facts. Now, libertarians will resist this type of paternalism, but society, interestingly, is accepting it on the grounds that these measures limit economic costs and disability that ultimately are paid for by the public. Now, over time, it's been necessary to deal with a few problems with the total autonomy model. Defining autonomy as the right of patients to make decisions without their healthcare provider trying to influence them prompts one to ask then, what are the rights and responsibilities of the doctor? In many fields, like law, education, economics, it's generally accepted that decisions are best made by experts. Physicians are told by society that we have an obligation to ensure quality and value in healthcare through our education, our expertise, ethical practice patterns. So to do this, can the physician really just be a passive participant in the actual patient encounter? Slide says, what therapy would you prefer? If the doctor is expected to make knowledge-based judgments, should he then, or he or she then, be told that they should withhold guidance or abdicate professional responsibility to the patient? Well, to address this dilemma, the bioethicists arrived at this concept of shared decision-making. It's a model for informed consent. And implicit in this model is the physician's responsibility to provide full and rather sensitive explanation to the patient, but it is then the patient's right to make the final decision about the care. There have been worries about autonomy as a sacrosanct principle for some time, but lately the issue has heated up because of several new developments in healthcare. Historically, most bioethical and legal cases had to do with the right of a patient to refuse interventions, often expressed through the absence of informed consent. And now the right of a patient to ask for a particular intervention and the coexisting responsibility of the physician to provide it comes up as a positive right. And this is said to be justified by the principle of respect for autonomy. Across the board, primary care physicians, cardiologists, emergency room personnel are all seeing an increase in specific demands by patients. There are good reasons for this. Public awareness has been heightened by the media's increasing fascination with medical advances, and this gives rise to new expectations and demands, and the public believes that nothing is beyond our grasp. The greater availability of information leads people to believe that they know as much as the medical experts. Universal third-party coverage has given rise to new demands, and it seems that modern society believes that as long as the medical service is paid for, the doctor should do whatever is requested. Discussions about medical consumerism are abounding in today's literature. Patients who insist on antibiotics for viral infections, patients who demand an MRI as part of their headache workup, patients who want a handicapped parking sticker, patients who request steroids because they make them feel better. Now, intensifying this consumerism are new developments, particularly in pharmaceuticals, that improve the quality of life for healthy people rather than treat disease. Consider growth hormone for children with short stature to increase their height, anabolic steroids to improve athletic endurance, and now neuroenhancers to boost memory and cognitive capacity. For the first time, physicians with no previous experience with cosmetic treatments are being asked to provide these in their respective specialties. Smart pills have become a growing part of some people's lives, especially students and those in the tech industry who see them as a way to be more efficient, smarter, and require less sleep. It's legal for physicians to prescribe these off-label to augment normal cognitive function, and this has led to the emerging but controversial field that's being called cosmetic neurology. The debate revolves around justifications for medicating those who are healthy to begin with, how to decide who are suitable candidates, how to evaluate patient motivation and conditions that result in people feeling that they need cognitive enhancement. But as the internists and primary care physicians are grappling with all of these questions, the public is speaking up with the voice of autonomy. In this article in The New Yorker, the author states, "This is an apt analogy with plastic surgery. In a consumer society like ours, if people are properly informed about the risks and benefits of neuroenhancers, they can make their own choices about how to alter their minds, just like they make their own choices about how to shape their bodies." Well, yes, Plastic surgery patients do make their own choices, but this kind of a conceptualization is so incomplete. What is underappreciated by the profession and by the public is the degree to which the plastic surgery patient is guided along every step of the way. Plastic surgery has always dealt with well-read patients who arrive and announce they know exactly what they want done and how to do it, with people with a consumer mindset who are actually going to be paying for their own care, with those in good health who want elective procedures that are done to treat the mind, not the body. And somehow, the surgeries get done in a safe, controlled way while the patients are confident that their autonomy is being respected. So what then is the magic that plastic surgeons perform regularly to balance patient rights and patient self-interests? How do plastic surgeons promote patient choice and still assure patient well-being? Somehow the plastic surgeon has learned how to be a good listener, consider the psychological health of the patient, make recommendations, suggest alternatives, set limits, and refuse care when it will provide little or no benefit. In short, guide, or if you will, exhibit beneficence. Beneficence, which is that second ethical principle often viewed as subordinate, that's defined as the duty to act for the good of the patient. I think it's interesting to speculate about why plastic surgery, more than other specialties, grew into playing such a strong role in the shared decision-making model, to decide that plastic surgeons have both the right and the obligation to show our expertise and our values when we're guiding patients. I think we could speculate that this comes from the ideas of highly principled thought leaders like Bob Goldwyn, or perhaps from the emphasis on ethics that's embedded in certification by the American Board of Plastic Surgery, or maybe from the vigorous ethics committees of our professional organizations. Or it just could be our innate awareness of the psychological vulnerability of some of our patients, or maybe it's also got to do with the malpractice environment in which we work. Those who believe that plastic surgeons blindly carry out what a patient wants and is willing to pay for are absolutely wrong. When patients insist they're willing to accept the risks of having a facelift while on Plavix or an abdominoplasty when they just can't quit smoking, each of us can decide whether we're willing to go forward. But the underlying decision is our own unconscious balancing of bioethical principles. An awareness that people have cognitive biases that can limit their ability to consistently and reliably choose what's best for them. There's ample evidence from social psychology that human beings make bad decisions routinely and predictably. People eat to the point of obesity, they smoke, they get hopelessly in debt. So how strong then is the argument that they must always be the ones making all the choices in healthcare? I think physicians have been led into feeling that they need to allow patients to hurt themselves on the grounds that this manifests respect. But the problem with autonomy as a trump card is that it's based on a utopian view of human nature. The Millsian champion of autonomy maintains that people are perfectly rational beings, most competent to make their own decisions. And hallowed though this is by Western tradition, it's too simplistic. We know that emotion and wishful thinking can lead to bad decision-making. And with some exceptions, plastic surgeons have avoided becoming complicit when this happens. There are prominent members of the bioethics community who are trying to pull away from this default emphasis on autonomy. Dr. Albert Tauber of BU and now at Tel Aviv University has said, although responsibility and beneficence have lost ground as medicine's guiding principles, I propose they be reasserted in alignment with the claims for patient autonomy. And the key issue in clinical care is not the protection of some severe form of individualism, but rather the exercise of autonomous choice within a moral context of trust. He points out that the autonomy model is so influential that it's been very difficult to get commitment to any ideas about a beneficence model in contemporary ethics in the United States. and he refers to the best-known advocate for a balanced relationship. And you'll see again this slide of Dr. Edmund Pellegrino, who I was fortunate enough to have as a friend, and he's pictured here when he was the keynote speaker at the Northeastern Society of Plastic Surgeons. 25 years ago, he coined the phrase beneficence and trust to mean that physicians have the responsibility to provide our expertise, and then both parties, the doctor and the patient, must be free to make decisions that respect the values of each. One of the toughest puzzles for most of the profession today is how to manage a public with a libertarian mindset dominated by the autonomy principle. In plastic surgery, we've learned how to do that. In everyday encounters, the plastic surgeon accepts responsibility to help smart people make good clinical choices and sometimes to act as gatekeeper. When doing this, he or she is living a traditional ethic that other physicians are struggling to rediscover. Our clinical decisions reflect our personal character, the values of the profession, and the trust of the public. Plastic surgery has a unique and special place in biomedical ethics. We have much to teach others. We know that patient autonomy is to be respected, but it is not an unassailable right. And most importantly, we always have to be true to ourselves and hold dear what we believe is in the patient's best interest. Thank you.
Outstanding.
That's my separado slide.
That's not bad, considering, the timing is, considering everything that happened. Good work. Excellent.
And now we invite you to step next door and to the welcome reception and the poster session. Thank you all for your attendance.